Imagine being a concubine and your romantic evening starts with a lineup. Yes, before even setting foot in the royal chambers, you and the other women were often inspected like livestock. Court eunuchs or trusted matrons would check everything from your clothing to your body, making sure you were clean, perfumed, and properly shaved. Hygiene wasn't exactly optional, it was state protocol. The king's bedroom wasn't just a bedroom, it was basically a government office, and you were expected to arrive like a document properly stamped and sealed. Some dynasties even had what you could call a sniff test. Women were bathed in flower-scented water, rubbed with oils, and their mouths rinsed with herbal concoctions before they were deemed fit for royal consumption. And forget spontaneity. Sex was never about passion here. It was about politics. Every touch, every caress was supposed to be part of the machinery that kept the dynasty running. What's wild is how ceremonial it all was. In Ming China, for example, concubines were sometimes carried into the emperor's room wrapped in quilts, so he could choose without even seeing their faces first. It was less romantic candlelight and more weird speed dating game show. Your body wasn't really yours, it was a tool for dynastic stability, and heaven forbid you sneeze or cough in the middle of the ritual. You might find yourself retired from palace service quicker than you can say chamomile tea. Basically, intimacy wasn't about desire, it was a full-on performance review, except with silk robes and incense instead of PowerPoints. Number 2, a rotating beds of power. Here's the fun part. Well, fun in the what even is happening sense. Many royal courts had strict rotation schedules for concubines. That's right. Who got to warm the royal sheets was dictated by a calendar thicker than your average college syllabus. In the Ottoman Empire, for instance, the Sultan's harem was organized like a military hierarchy. Women were rotated in and out with precision, because access to the Sultan's bed meant access to influence. Concubines didn't just bring themselves, they brought their entire faction. If one woman got chosen too often, it wasn't just pillow talk, it meant her family, her allies, even her political patrons gained leverage at court. It's like being chosen for The Bachelor, except the Roses could start a civil war. And then there was the bizarre rule-keeping. Some kings had astrologers pick which nights were lucky for sex. Others had ministers track encounters like accountants managing state finances. Imagine your love life being audited, complete with official logs of when, how often, and with whom. Privacy? Not in the royal palace. And here's the kicker. Some rulers, paranoid about being poisoned, wouldn't even drink or eat near a concubine. So you're lying there in an elaborate ritual of intimacy, and the king refuses to sip water from the same jug. Truly, the stuff of romance novels, if those novels were written by your tax accountant and your court astrologer working together. Number 3, the ritual of purity. So let's say your number finally comes up on the royal bed calendar. Before you even think about silk sheets or sultry glances, you're off to the cleansing chamber. Concubines in many royal courts were forced into elaborate purification rituals that made spa days look like amateur hour. Think multiple baths in rose water, hair washed with scented oils, and every inch of skin scrubbed until you basically smelled like a walking perfume bottle. In ancient Persia and India, these rituals could stretch for hours. Attendants would massage your body, braid your hair, and paint your nails, all while chanting prayers or reciting verses. Romantic, right? Not really. It was less about pampering you and more about making you a perfectly polished offering to the king. You weren't going to meet a man. You were going to be presented like a sacred relic, and don't think you could skip a step. In the Qing dynasty, the emperor's concubines were even forced to gargle with bitter herbs before entering his quarters, just in case their breath offended His Majesty's delicate nose. Basically, the royal bedroom wasn't about intimacy at all. It was about turning your body into an altar of obedience. You'd step out of these rituals radiant, flawless, and smelling like 10 flower gardens exploded on you. But deep down, you knew it wasn't your beauty being celebrated. It was your ability to conform. Because in the palace, smelling perfect didn't mean you were loved. It just meant you'd passed inspection. Number 4. The candlelit parade. Picture this. You're finally dressed, powdered, perfumed, and ready. Now comes the part where you're escorted to the royal chambers like a prize cow at auction. In some Chinese dynasties, concubines were wrapped in quilts and literally carried by eunuchs into the emperor's room. In other courts, women had to walk barefoot through torch-lit hallways, draped in sheer fabrics designed to show just enough skin to make it clear what the evening was about. It wasn't just about arrival. It was about spectacle. In Mughal India, concubines sometimes had to dance or perform music before being summoned, like a bizarre talent show where the only prize was sharing a bed with the ruler. In Europe, mistresses of kings were sometimes paraded at banquets in front of the entire court, their beauty and jewels on display as if to say, "Behold, the chosen one tonight." Romantic subtlety? Non-existent. The irony is thick here. While the king was surrounded by gold, velvet, and candlelight, you, the concubine, were the actual decoration. You weren't a guest. You were the showpiece, the entertainment, the living symbol of power. The more dramatic your entrance, the more it reinforced that the king had not just one, but dozens of beautiful women ready to serve him at command. So yeah, imagine your date night starting with a fashion runway, only instead of applause at the end, the prize was being locked in a bedroom with a paranoid monarch who thought half the palace wanted him dead. Honestly, it makes Netflix and chill sound like the height of romance. Number 5, on the watchful eyes. You'd think once you got past the lineup, the bath, and the candlelit parade, you'd finally get a shred of privacy, right? Wrong. In many palaces, concubines were never alone with the ruler. Hidden attendants, eunuchs, or guards were always stationed nearby, sometimes even in the same chamber just behind a curtain, ready to intervene if things went wrong. By wrong, I mean if the concubine tried to poison the king, make him fall asleep too long, or, heaven forbid, whisper political advice in his ear. In the Ottoman harem, eunuchs kept meticulous records of who entered and left the sultan's chambers, like night shift bouncers at the most awkward nightclub in history. In China, palace records show that officials literally logged which concubine shared the emperor's bed and for how many hours, sometimes down to the minute. Think about it. Your intimacy became a spreadsheet entry. Not exactly the spark romance novels talk about. And then there was the ritual of the morning after check. Sheets could be inspected. Concubines could be questioned, all to make sure no assassination plots, no pregnancy scandals, and no secrets escaped those gilded walls. Imagine doing the walk of shame while a court official is holding a clipboard, asking, "So, how did it go?" The watchful eyes weren't just about paranoia. They were about control. Kings might have been the most powerful men in the world, but in their bedrooms they lived in constant fear. Fear of betrayal, fear of poison, fear of being remembered as the fool who let a concubine pull the strings. And that fear turned private desire into public theater. Number 6, the politics of pregnancy. Here's where things got deadly serious. Concubines weren't just bed partners, they were baby factories, and the stakes couldn't be higher. A concubine who bore a son could go from nobody to queenmaker overnight. But the path to royal maternity was lined with paranoia, jealousy, and enough sabotage to fill an entire season of Game of Thrones. In many courts, concubines were monitored during their fertile days. In some dynasties, they were only allowed into the king's chamber when astrologers declared the stars favorable for conception. Forget romance. Your sex life was a state-sponsored fertility experiment. And if you did get pregnant, buckle up. Other concubines might slip poisons into your food, bribe doctors to sabotage your care, or spread rumors that your child wasn't legitimate. Take the Ottoman harem again. Once a concubine had a son, she often became his full-time guardian and was removed from the sultan's bed forever to prevent favoritism. Sounds like a promotion, but in reality, you were isolated, surrounded by rivals, and your child's life was constantly at risk. If he became a threat to the throne, he could be strangled with a silk cord before you even finished your morning tea. Pregnancy wasn't just biology, it was politics in its rawest, cruelest form. A royal womb was the most dangerous piece of real estate in the palace. Every craving, every stomach ache, every craving for pickles was essentially a national security issue. Imagine 9 months of pregnancy knowing your baby could either be the next ruler or the next casualty. Number 7. The ritual of submission. Once you finally reached the royal bed, the evening wasn't about passion, tenderness, or even mutual attraction. It was about ritualized obedience. In some Chinese dynasties, concubines were required to bow 3 times before approaching the emperor's bed, then crawl on their knees as if they were approaching a shrine. Picture it. You're dressed in layers of embroidered silk, hair lacquered into impossible shapes, and now you're shuffling forward like a human carpet just to prove you're not an equal. You're property. Even the act of lying down wasn't up to you. In certain courts, the ruler dictated your posture. Flat on your back, arms at your sides, no eye contact unless permitted. Think human statue rather than lover. In Japan's shogunate palaces, some concubines were ordered to remain completely silent during the encounter, as if making noise might dishonor the solemnity of the ritual. If this sounds less like romance and more like assembling IKEA furniture with no instructions and no eye contact, you're not wrong. And of course, every gesture had political weight. A concubine who looked too eager could be labeled scheming, too cold, and she might be dismissed. It was a balancing act. Appear devoted without seeming manipulative, appear humble without appearing dull. The royal bedroom was less a place of pleasure and more a stage where your every sigh and blink were judged like a performance. At the end of it, submission didn't just mean your body. It meant surrendering your individuality, your personality, your agency. You weren't there to be loved. You were there to be controlled. Number 8. The nightly taboos. Every palace had its own list of bedroom don'ts, and some were weirder than others. In certain Indian courts, concubines were forbidden from wearing jewelry in bed, lest a sharp edge injure the king. In China, women weren't allowed to sleep in the emperor's bed after the act was over. They had to bow out, literally, leaving him alone to nap. Forget cuddling. The only spooning was reserved for soup. Other places, things got even stranger. Astrologers sometimes dictated which positions were allowed on certain nights, supposedly to maximize fertility or align with the stars. In Europe, some kings followed religious restrictions that banned intimacy on feast days, Sundays, or, get this, during Lent. That meant concubines had to memorize a calendar of divine, off-limits days, or risk being accused of tempting the king into sin. Then, there were the food taboos. Concubines in the Mughal harem, for example, were forbidden from eating garlic or onions before entering the royal chamber. Too smelly. Meanwhile, others were force-fed aphrodisiac tonics made of saffron, honey, or crushed pearls to enhance performance. Nothing says romance like chugging a pearl milkshake before heading into the royal sheets. Taboos weren't about protecting intimacy, they were about control. They turned sex into a sacred, state-sanctioned event, full of rules, prohibitions, and superstitions. The irony? The more they tried to strip it of danger or chaos, the stranger it all became. Because nothing says sexy night like being told your jewelry, your garlic breath, and half the calendar are banned. Number 9. The jealousy games. Now, if you thought the biggest stress was the king's paranoia, think again. The real nightmare often came from other concubines. Being chosen for the night didn't just mean silk sheets, it meant enemies. Rival concubines would fume, plot, and sometimes sabotage each other with the subtlety of a real housewives' reunion. In the Forbidden City, jealous rivals sometimes bribed eunuchs to accidentally leave another concubine off the rotation list. In Mughal India, there are records of women lacing perfumes with mild toxins to make a rival break out in rashes before her night with the emperor. Meanwhile, in Europe, mistresses of kings often faced relentless slander campaigns, their reputations shredded by jealous nobles who wanted them gone. And then came the mind games. Imagine spending your entire day waiting for a lantern to be lit outside your chamber door, a signal that you'd been chosen. Some nights, the lantern was lit for you. Other nights, it was lit for someone else. The humiliation of watching your rival float past in embroidered silk while you stayed behind. Brutal. It was emotional torture packaged as candlelight ambiance. The cruel irony? Every victory was temporary. Today's favorite could become tomorrow's outcast, and no matter how intoxicating the king's favor was, you were never really competing for his love. You were competing for survival, for influence, and for a shot at carving out a future that didn't end with being forgotten in a palace wing. Basically, the harem wasn't a sorority. It was a royal Hunger Games with perfume and eyeliner. Number 10. The aftermath of desire. The night might end, but the consequences never did. For concubines, intimacy was like rolling dice with destiny. A single encounter could make you the mother of a future king, or mark you as disposable. Some courts had brutal morning-after rituals. In the Qing dynasty, concubines were escorted back to their chambers before dawn, stripped of any sign they'd been with the emperor, and expected to resume their duties as if nothing happened. In Ottoman palaces, women might not see the sultan again for months, or ever. Imagine the whiplash of being treated like the center of the universe for a few hours, only to be discarded like yesterday's laundry. Even worse, the gossip. Servants whispered, rivals speculated, and officials kept track. One unlucky remark, one sign of arrogance after being chosen, and you could fall from grace instantly. Some concubines who flaunted their status were quietly reassigned to far-off palace quarters or even forced into retirement. Others were poisoned, strangled, or mysteriously vanished, because in the royal court there was nothing more dangerous than a woman who looked too happy after leaving the king's bed. At the end of the day, desire was never really about love or pleasure. It was about politics, paranoia, and power plays that stretched far beyond the bedchamber. The forbidden night rituals weren't just strange traditions. They were the front lines of dynastic survival. If you've made it this far, clearly you enjoy a little scandal served with your history. So do yourself a favor, hit that subscribe button before some medieval court decides your loyalty needs to be tested. Trust me, it's way less humiliating than a virginity check. Subscribe now, and I'll keep digging up the bizarre, the forbidden, and the downright ridiculous stories history tried to bury.